right. So
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. This is Valerie with Mental Health and Addiction Services. Thank you so much for being with us today. Us here at the department really appreciate your commitment to this work and all the other work that you're doing in your communities. I think you will really enjoy today's webinar. My hope is that this will have you all set up for the implementation dollars. We hope to release a really brief application for those dollars within the next couple weeks, with our ambitious goal that we'll have everything awarded to you by the beginning of January, so that you have more time to use those dollars to implement in your communities. And with that, I will pass it on back to the leadership team to get us started.
thank you very much, Valerie. So just one last opportunity for roll call. If you haven't done so already, please type your first and last name and county in the chat bar. Again, this is how we take attendance. As a reminder, we are required to keep attendance for SAMHSA as a condition of our funding. So ensuring that we have good attendance records will help us meet our commitment for these federal dollars. Again, please keep your line muted unless you are speaking. Also, we will not need computer audio, so you can keep that turned off. And then, of course, our standing reminder about the hold function on your phone. Please try not to utilize that today, as we will all hear your hold music until you rejoin our conversation. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Tracy Johnson, who will be engaging in the updates and time of sharing. Tracy. Tracy, you might be muted. It looks like Tracy's having some audio problems, so I will go ahead and playing the part of Tracy Johnson today. So I would like to encourage our project directors to provide any updates they have on their CCIM4C projects or any successes that they're having. If you could go ahead and unmute your line and share those, that would be great. We always learn from each other's successes. What new events are going on in your community? What successes have you had in developing infrastructure or capacity to do your CCIM4C work?
Holly?
Yes.
Hi, it's Wayne County. I had shared in our face-to-face in November that we had our opioid-focused sequential intercept mapping coming up at the end of the month. So I can now share that we did that at Tuesday and Wednesday of last week. We completed that.
Great. And what are some key points that you'd like to share with the group, key findings that you learned, or ways that the mapping was valuable to your community?
I think that we had many of the familiar faces from our opiate task force, and our subcommittees were present, but we also were able to develop some buy-in from some other sectors. Housing and metropolitan housing was represented. He's not always there. We had a wider spectrum of law enforcement and the jails represented. So I think that we will be able to develop some different partnerships, having had that shared experience. We are waiting on the report. Obviously, that takes a while, but it was helpful to see at the end of the mapping exercise, for those who haven't done it, there are many, many different areas of concentration that are identified throughout the course of the first day. And at the end of the first day, everyone is given the opportunity to vote for their top 3 priorities. The one thing that was interesting to us was seeing how the vote played out, because we were surprised, and on day 2, when we found out the top 5 priorities, we were all surprised that housing didn't actually make it as a top priority. in the vote, which we kind of expected that it would. So it was helpful to see how other members of the community would prioritize what areas need our immediate attention, so that we can figure out some of the priorities we've identified, how to integrate them into the areas that other folks are saying they really want us to focus on first.
And this is Judy with Joanna. It also highlighted that MAT was still, which is one of our priorities, obviously, with CCIM4C, that it was still in the priorities and very clear. So it did reconfirm some things for us too.
Good, thank you for sharing. It sounds like, there's always that risk when you get broad community input into your thinking, but sometimes it allows you to see what people are not thinking, but also it confirms, where you're at and moving forward. And it sounds like you had a little bit of both, right?
Correct.
Thank you for sharing. Others, successes or updates that you would like to provide for us? What challenges are you experiencing that you would like to share with the group, or questions that you have for other project directors? And as a friendly reminder, if you're not speaking, if you could keep your line on mute, that would be helpful. Well, it sounds like that we don't have any updates or any other things to share, so I will go ahead and turn the webinar over to April.
Hello, everyone. This is April. I just wanted to do a brief review of the learning objectives for today's webinar. So after participating today, and hopefully we'll have a lot of sharing later in the webinar, we hope that you'll come away having built more personal relationships and developed those by sharing your successes and asking for peer support. And even though Holly already went over these things, we can still continue to do that during times of sharing later, and maybe you'll be reminded of a few more things. We hope that you'll be able to describe how this CCIM4C team can utilize your ecosystems to identify and select strategies and interventions. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about ecosystems. And then we hope you'll be able to complete and submit strategy proposal forms to our leadership team after today. We also want you to be able to assess your strengths, gaps, and needed changes in your ecosystem and your BHAG. Hopefully from today's discussion, you'll be able to assess those things, as well as access your training and technical assistance services. We'll go over that at the end of the webinar. So as you'll remember, as I mentioned in the emails for today, today's topic is ecosystems. And as you'll remember, this is one of your deliverables for Ohio MOS. So you need to develop subcommittees and promote support to new and existing subcommittees, focusing on prevention, treatment, and recovery support. In your community, based on your specific needs, there may be other subcommittees that you need to develop, but you definitely need to focus on these three because this is deliverable number 4 in your scope of work. These ecosystems can help you develop these subcommittees, and they're important for describing how they relate to each other. They can take any form or many forms, maybe not any form, but it can be visual, it can be written down, it can be an explanation in text, depending on what works best for your community. It's just important that everyone has an ecosystem to describe how these prevention, treatment, and recovery supports or any other subcommunities in your specific community all work together. If you'll also remember, you submitted a slide about your ecosystem back in August, because in June we provided an on-demand video on ecosystems. It might be helpful if you want to work on your ecosystem now to review this video, which can be found at this link, with your coalition, your subcommittees, other groups, etc., to really kind of remember what ecosystems are all about. And then obviously you had a chance to update your ecosystem slide before today's webinar. Since that's going to be one of our primary topics, we are going to be doing a lot of sharing around that. And thank you so much to those of you who sent in new ecosystems. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Holly to talk about how ecosystems relate to strategy selection.
Thank you, April. As a reminder, we have the big picture of our CCIM4C projects. We started with this idea of a strategic plan to reduce opioid deaths and also increase access to opioid use disorder treatment. We found that this visual is very useful because it supports communities in understanding that opioid use disorder is a wicked problem and it will take multifaceted solutions. While this graphic is helpful, it must be undergirded by more specific information. This alone is useful for people who just need the 30,000-foot view. However, we need to have another tool that helps us get at what actually are we going to do. In the beginning, we started working with the strategic plan map. And the strategic plan map, we spent a lot of time thinking about our theories of change. And most communities have completed a theory of change for their 5 opioid use disorder related plans, which demonstrates your data-driven approach. And when you use a data-driven approach from the start of any type of initiative, you have an outcomes-driven approach. And that's evidenced here by how your theory of change is linked directly to your outcomes. Again, if you start and input data into a strategic plan, you know that you hope to pick some type of strategy that's going to change that data, which then becomes your outcomes. The big gap that we're currently working on filling is that theory of action. This is where we select the strategies that we want to add in our community, maybe enhance in our community, maybe maintain in our community, maybe reduce overlap in our community. This part is the key when you ask for funding. Today, we're going to spend some time in the middle of our strategic plan map. Our communities can be in a lot of different places with regards to strategies. Some of you on this virtual webinar today are funders and do not engage in direct service or implementation. So your strategic plan map may be where you are going to allocate dollars to providers in your community in the form of contracts or subcontracts or whatever mechanism you use to provide that direct service that you need that is going to make the change you hope to see in your theory of change. Some of you provide only treatment services. Some provide only prevention services, right? Depending on the type of organization, you may be in totally different positions. So one thing is certain. No one single agency can do all the work that's necessary to address the opioid use disorder issue alone. There has to be an ecosystem in place, because if you are a prevention provider, you won't be able to do treatment services, and that's part of your treatment plan map. So this is really why we need to move forward with some type of ecosystem. You received strategic planning support. So if you're seeing these strategic plan maps for the first time, or you're interested in fine-tuning them, now's a good reminder for the links to where we have provided strategic planning support. All of this information is archived on the CCIM4C website, which has been designed to be sort of one-stop shopping as you navigate through this project. In February, we provided 2 on-demand learning events related to the strategic plan map, and those are listed up top. And then in April, we provided the templates for the strategic plans along with an annotated strategic plan map. So if you're looking for those templates or you need an annotation, that is where you find them, support on the website. I'm going to turn it back over to April today, and she's going to facilitate a conversation where all of us are going to come together virtually. So it's helpful if you imagine what it would be like if we were together in the same room, about how you all are using your ecosystem to select and implement those strategies.
Thanks, Holly. So the first thing that we want to talk about in this idea exchange is how many communities have selected strategies. So if you could type in the chat box the answer to question 1. So please indicate, we have all of your communities up there. Thank you for entering your name and county. And then just indicate whether you have selected strategies for your OUD plan. And it probably wouldn't hurt to type your county again, just so we don't have to, others don't have to mix and match and remember. But so if you could type in the chat box your community name and whether or not, just a yes or no, if you've selected strategies to address your OUD plan. Great, thanks, Kylie. So Muskingum has strategies. Florence does not. Fairmont has some, but not all. This is a perfect start. Morrow County has strategies. Ashtabula has no strategies. Fairfield's in the process of selecting strategies. Clinton County has no strategies. Marion has some, but not all. Clark has an idea, but no formal selection. Wayne has informal strategies, kind of similar there, it seems like, to some others. Lorraine has some, but not all. So we have a really good mix here of those who have selected strategies, those that have not, and some people are in between, which is perfect. Just trying to make sure, if anyone else has already done the check to make sure we've heard from everyone, but please let me know, but I'm just trying to make sure really quickly. So if you have selected strategies, which would be, even if you selected some strategies, so Muskingum, let's hear from you. Morrow, let's definitely hear from you. And then those of you who indicated you have some but not all, Marion, even Clark and Lorraine, you have informally selected strategies. If you could talk in the, tell us in the chat box what strategies you have selected. Specify the plan, whether it's prevention related in terms of supply reduction, demand reduction, or death prevention, or whether it's treatment or recovery related. So one of those 5 plans, and then identify the strategy for us. So for example, if you're talking about a supply reduction plan, you might be using the Terra bag. So just quickly, if we could type in the chat box the plan and the strategy you have selected, if you have some or all of your strategies selected. And then if you didn't get a chance to answer whether or not you have selected strategies, you can go ahead and type that in as well. And we're going to talk later about the process for strategy selection. So all I really need now is for you to type in your plan, one of the 5 plans that's related to OUD, and what the strategy is. So it doesn't need to be a lengthy explanation. And if you've selected all of your strategies, I don't know that we need all of them. You can just give an example. I see a lot of people are typing, so that's why I'm trying to encourage brevity. Oh, so many answers came in at once. Great. So for a demand reduction plan, Christy says that they are working on implementing the farming effects for demand reduction, and then for supply reduction, nursing education, and a campaign to reduce stigma generally. That's great. Thank you, Christy. And Clark, from Amanda, we have a recovery support strategy of employer forums and education to help increase the likelihood of hiring someone who may be in recovery. And then as a demand reduction strategy, they're considering youth-led prevention. For death prevention, they're looking for a needle exchange. And then let's see, Moss says that in Lorain County, they're looking at supply reduction plan, implementing education related to safe medication storage and disposal, and so all their drug marts will become distribution hubs, which is in 2019, which is a good way to ensure that people have access. In Muskingum, Kylie says all of the subcommittees, I'm guessing, meaning by subgroups, will be addressing education, awareness, and stigma, because this is a huge area for them. Supply reduction will be educating physicians on prescribing and disposal. And then Ashley and Morrow, I'm not reading everyone's, I don't mean to skip things. Thank you so much for your information. Ashley says for demand reduction, they're increasing community education on proper medication disposal, making available lock boxes, Deterra bags, and education brochures. Thank you. These are great examples for addressing your individual plans. Hopefully others on the call are also reading these and seeing what other communities are doing. Great. So thank you all for those examples. So next, I'm going to encourage you all to unmute and talk about, for those who have selected strategies or even are in the process of selecting them, have some informal ideas, what your process for strategy selection was like. We want to be cognizant that we're on a time schedule, so talking is faster than typing. Tony has asked if we can get a list of the examples after the webinar, which I think is a great idea, and we can facilitate that. But now let's move on to what your process was like for strategy selection. And remember, the webinars are recorded, so you'll have access to this as well afterwards. So since typing takes a long time, as we saw from the last example, go ahead and unmute and talk about your process.
This is Kylie from Muskingum County. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you, Kylie.
Okay. So we held a summit in May, and then we broke each area out into subgroups. Those subgroups then took the data and everything that we talked about at the big meeting and worked up until now to select those strategies, and then we're moving into implementation phase. So we did that work. We decided those strategies as subgroups.
So each of your subgroups met to talk about the strategies relevant to their specific plan?
Yes.
Great. That sounds great. And you had mentioned that you had all of your strategies. Am I correct there?
Yes.
Great. So can you think of a specific plan and talk about when that subcommittee met, how you approached looking at the plan and selecting the strategy?
Well, we didn't physically have the plan. I guess I used that as a tool kind of behind the scenes, and I know I had talked about this at one of our face-to-face learning communities, that when we bring kind of things like that to our coalition, it can feel very academic to them. It can be kind of overwhelming, and they have said in the past that it views as though we're just checking a box for a grant. So for a survey and some feedback that I got, I kind of have those things in the background, and we kind of work through it with talking about it. So does that make sense? Like, they don't know that there's a strategic plan map, and they don't know that we're working through the steps with them with those things in mind. So talking through those things, what does the data look like? What are we missing? What do we need to implement? So we're not physically using the physical tangible map, but we're still addressing all those points.
I'm just curious, Ashley.
We're still talking about all those things.
Ashley, this is Holly, and I just am curious about something. Do you care if I ask you a question about your approach?
Oh, are you talking to me,
Yes.
Kylie?
Kylie?
Yes. Yeah.
So when we work with young people, we use the same form of the strategic plan map with our youth-led prevention, and a lot of our adult allies choose to show to use the same approach that you are using, kind of use it in the background. But at some point, they found it very valuable to sort of unveil a complete map, and the young people tend to feel very proud. I was just curious, what are your plans to actually share a completed map with your group, or is that something you don't see yourself doing?
I don't think we're there yet. What we've just recently done in November, we had a kind of a 6-month follow-up meeting with all of those people. So all of those people that have been working on subcommittees then came all together, and they each shared through a PowerPoint presentation. Each subgroup got 2 PowerPoint slides to be able to share what they've been working on and how moving forward. I can see that happening after implementation, after we kind of have an evaluation plan. We're talking about implementing a dashboard and that sort of thing. So that may be possible. It's not out of the question. I guess it just hasn't been part of the process yet, or thought about, I guess, of how we would share that.
Sure, thank you. And I think also if you're a dashboard model, the strategic plans maps work very nicely with that dashboard model and evaluation, because the evaluation is built in. So I would just be curious to see how those tools, as you move forward, will sort of come to the forefront.
Right, because we're using them for conversations. Everything that's on the map, we're having conversations about. It's just not, like I said, we're not physically using that as part of our meetings.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kylie. So who else wants to talk about the process, and particularly if the ecosystem was helpful in your process or if you used it? But anyone really, open up the line to, especially Mauro, Marion, Lorraine, and Clark, since you guys were brave before. But anyone, please go ahead and talk about your process.
Oh, this is
Okay.
okay. This is Hamza from Lorraine. Our process when it came, we had the same issues. We didn't show anybody. We stopped actually sharing the strategic plan map just because there's a coalition in our county that has put some barriers up for us moving forward. But once we presented the plan, they essentially tried to create work groups called the same thing, and it was causing confusion. So we went away from sharing it and just kind of sharing what is the goal for like supply reduction. And at the time when we brought that discussion to our community engagement work group, we shared that we were donated 10,000 disposal pouches, and just everybody kind of shared of ideas of how to distribute pouches and to expand to medication safe and what is the best possible way to access more residents at certain hubs. So people were sharing just finding those partners that attract a lot of residents, but they don't have to necessarily tie into this area of focus. So we looked at libraries, but we just found issues for engagement with residents, because part of the donation from the pharmaceutical company is that there has to be a face-to-face education, and just the community engagement work group was able to provide contact for Drug Mart and individuals at their headquarters where they could assure us that the pharmacies could give that education and provide all the distribution throughout the whole county.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, and would you mind telling us a little bit more about your education related to safe medication storage and disposal? You said you're trying to get that distributed, did you say through pharmacies?
Yeah, through all Drug Mart pharmacies. There's, I think, 8 locations throughout the county. So we will send medication safe and disposal pouches to the headquarters in Medina, which they will distribute a certain amount to each location, which will have prepaid a postcard survey where we could collect data of what the individuals attended to use it for, if this is going to prompt them to either start storing medication in the safe or using the disposal pouches, educate them how they could get additional free disposal pouches from the addiction policy website, educate them on different drug drop boxes throughout the county, because we did surveys where people they don't know where to access certain things, and so like the drop boxes, even when it came to naloxone, and part of that survey, they didn't even know how to access naloxone. And then there's information from addiction policy related to medication storage and disposal. So we added that. It will be all put together with a pouch or a safe, and they will just send in the prepaid postcards back to us. And also we're developing a dashboard for medication storage and disposal, which has built-in links for people to go and order additional disposal pouches, links to where they could find every location of drop boxes throughout the county and seeing how many is distributed.
I love that you built in a data piece for yourself there. As a data person, I was really excited when you mentioned that. So thank you so much for sharing. Any other questions for Lorraine? Great, so thank you again. So yeah, someone else, what was your process? You've heard from Lorraine and Muskingum now. Let's hear from someone else about the process for strategy selection. Could be related or not.
This is Carrie McKee from Clark County, and I'm new to the process. Halfway through, I joined in, and things were very confusing at first, but things are finally starting to come together. And a lot of it is because of the ecosystem. It's finally starting to make sense. We had a lot of strategies in place, but not necessarily related to the logic plan. So now we have to go back, and it all makes sense. There's data there. There were things happening that needed to happen, but now we're putting it in a format that it's all coming together, and the working groups are making sense. Because we've kind of formed our leadership team, I just see the pieces finally falling into place. And you can probably tell by my tone of voice, I'm not as frustrated as I was at the beginning, but I'm also seeing how the CCIM4C is pulling together things that we are doing as far as grant writing and things that needed to be in place that weren't there before. The path is all starting to make sense. So, but and as far as furthering strategies, these working groups now, I think we will be able to use the strategic plan maps. I think that the leaders will buy into that, not necessarily the group at large, because I've tried to present that, didn't go over as well, but I think our leaders will buy into that, and then we will be able to further develop our strategies and build on what we've already have happening.
Well, that all sounds like you've made some great progress, Carrie, and that the tools have been really helpful for you. So thank you for that sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah. What about someone who hasn't gotten a chance to pick strategies yet or is in process? Can you tell us about the process that you're approaching your strategy selection with, how you're going to address that? So whether that's Ashtabula or Fairfield, someone who maybe doesn't have strategies or is in the process, and how you're approaching it.
April, this is Tony Ashton from Fairfield County, and we have our subcommittee meetings planned for December, and this will be the topic of conversation for our recovery support subcommittee, our prevention education subcommittee, and our treatment subcommittee. So it'll be a discussion process for each of the committees to be able to come up with their strategies and then be able to come to consensus on what strategies we want to move forward with.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. So you have, did you say you have subcommittees for each of the 5?
So we do. So we have prevention education, and then we have recovery supports, treatment, advocacy. Will deal with stigma for the collective impact group. And am I missing one? I was thinking there were 4. The overdose reversal. That's going to go under treatment and prevention education.
Okay. And what do you think about Carrie's idea that she just brought up? So maybe not in, well, I don't know. What are your subcommittees like? Have you introduced the strategic plan map? Has that been helpful? Or if you found it unhelpful, like other communities, what do you think about Carrie's suggestion about just using them with the leaders of the committees and then opening the discussion to the larger group?
So some of our committees are on different levels. So the Prevention Education Committee has been meeting for a number of years, and so they have been updated right along with the collective impact process. So they are already knowledgeable about what we've been doing with the strategic plan maps and the ecosystem map, so they're knowledgeable. The third committees are just getting started, so they will need to be brought up to date. And the way our opiate task force is planned is that there is an opiate task force, which is the larger group. And they have decided to meet less frequently since the subcommittees are meeting on probably monthly basis. So I think that we will talk about our strategies in our smaller subcommittees, and then we'll update the larger opiate task force about what's been selected. So did that answer your question, April?
Yeah, I think that was a perfect answer. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. So yeah, we're on some different levels with some of our committees.
Yeah. Any other questions for Tony? So let's see if we can get one more person. I particularly thank you, Tony, for sharing about what you plan to be your process. I like that sharing as well. So one other person talked about the process for selecting strategies in your community, how you plan to use the plan maps, anything you might have learned from the people discussing now, that would be great.
This is Bridget from Ashtabula.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi. We similarly have our subcommittees through our substance abuse leadership team, and our connectedness group has already met for the first time, and our communication committee has met. And our process is very similar to what was just described, where we are using our committees to kind of process the strategies and then make recommendations to our larger group. The larger group has had access and has been on the development of our strategic plan all along, so they're familiar with it. Some of the subcommittee members, they maybe haven't seen the full plan, but they're aware of that there is a plan, I guess.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to all of those who shared. So the last thing we want to talk about is how, and Carrie, I'm going to pick on you if that's okay, because your sharing was so good. But if you could start our conversation on, you mentioned that your ecosystem was really helpful to you in organizing things and helping, I think you said, even yourself understand how it was all working. So if you could talk about how you use the ecosystem a little bit more, or how you plan to use it in the future related to implementing strategies for your OUD-related plans, that would be great.
Oh, okay. It started with, there were a lot of grants that we were trying to meet deliverables. And most of them, there was some overlap, but there was some pulling and tugging about who was going to be the forefront in getting their deliverables done. So I brought the backbone group together, and I showed them all of the things that they were saying, this is what we need to accomplish. And then they bought into that they needed to be united and forming the strategic plan map and the strategies for, not the strategies, but they were going to be more the group that was going to decide the direction and the support that would be given to the leadership team. The leadership team is probably going to be our 12, well, is mostly made up of our 12 sectors and other people that are the doers, that are the leaders in our community. Then we have the whole coalition, that those are lots of agencies, those are lots of people that are just concerned citizens, or they represent just many different sectors of our community, not all getting involved, but they're interested, they're coming. They haven't found their little niche yet of what they want to become involved in, but out of that group then will become our working groups, and some of those have already formed. As you can see, we've got around the table, we've got a group working on the medicine disposal bags, and the community center with recovery supports. We've got a group working there, and that we've got a couple of little different things that people are starting to form in different areas that are really the strategies that we're working on in our different segments there. And then the whole group will be a part of what our BHAG is, which hasn't really been decided yet, but we know it has something to do with the mental health, connectiveness, the trauma. There's several coalitions in our group that are kind of working on the same thing. There's talk that we're going to bring those together and let them formulate. We know that trauma, we've been told that that's kind of a little bit big to tackle, but it's all the mental health issue that we're looking at that kind of is a part of each one of our different working groups that are working there. So it'll be people from those groups that kind of form the leadership for our big underlying problem that we're going to tackle in our community. So did I describe it? And then it's just helped me understand the process of how we're getting these groups to interact and work together. And sometimes there's small, like we talked about at the last meeting, there's just small wins that we need to have, that they're working on projects for a success. And then there's times when we really need to collaborate and work 2 or 3 of these groups together for the bigger outcome. And I'm seeing that starting to happen then.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. I think probably a lot of people can relate to, having a larger coalition of people who are volunteers who just want to do something. So I think maybe the structure of having your backbone on your leadership team, organizing that larger group of people makes a lot of sense. Sometimes when you're going through the planning stages of things, you might have fewer people who want to be involved because they want to do. And right. So it sounds like then your leadership team can kind of not really dole out assignments, but, help the people who want to do while they do more of the planning. Am I hearing you right?
Exactly. And then the whole idea is to find whatever that interest is that someone has, like out of our leadership team, which is where I've got up at the top that we'll have reinforcing activities, shared data, and continuous communication. Actually, data and communication are 2 working groups, and one of those came out of the leadership team where someone was, both of them, but the communication is a good example where someone that was on that team is just really excited about media, Facebook, all of that communication. He's taken a group and formed a working group out of that. And, they've gone through the planning process. They've went through a training for the strategic planning. They've done a lot of different things, and they are just really moving, but they are part of all of the groups. They're not just, they work with all of the groups there. So they're a big part of our coalition. And so is the data committee. So, but that's all come out of the leadership team that are the ones that, really are working, but they've pulled in some of those coalition members that really didn't have a purpose at one point in time.
Yeah, that can be hard to bring people in. So I'm glad that that's working for you. Thank you so much, Carrie.
You're welcome.
So thank you for providing us with that example, especially. So someone else now, go ahead and start by telling me your name and county so I can find your slide. And let's talk about how utilizing the ecosystem is important for accessing strategy or discussing strategies or implementing strategies. Yeah, please share. Another idea would be if the discussion so far has given you an idea about your ecosystem. We can talk about that too.
This is Wayne County again. The timing of this webinar is a little bit awkward for us because we had the SIM last week and we're still processing what came out of that. And then next week we have our large group opiate task force meeting, which will be a good number of people who were at the sequential intercept mapping exercise, and also some folks who would have been there, but scheduling prohibited it. So we're a little bit awkward right now because we're trying to figure out how we will integrate what came out of the SIM into what we already have going. And that's not a bad place to be. We see that at least one of our subcommittees has lost some of its momentum. And our hope was that the sequential intercept mapping would help kind of light a fire under that group and maybe give them something new to direct their efforts towards. But right now, we just haven't had those committee meetings and that large group exchange to really figure out how we're going to make everything work together, if that makes sense. So our ecosystem map, we didn't make any changes to it, but I see that there's the opportunity or the potential that in the coming weeks or maybe probably more likely January with the holidays coming up, that we might be expanding it in the future.
Thanks, Judy. So how do you see it possibly getting expanded based on all this incoming information that you've gleaned?
Well, one thing
And that is Joanna, right?
Yeah, it's Joanna.
Oh, sorry, Joanne.
It's okay. I think that, and I hate to keep bringing up the same thing, but we weren't really addressing housing outside of recovery housing as an issue that we might want to be looking at as a larger group. And that did come up in the SIM. So that would be a question about how is a barrier of getting stable housing impacting folks' ability to get treatment. Our concentration on housing has largely been expanding our recovery housing availability, and we are making progress in that direction. But we just, we're still kind of, like I said, processing. There was a lot in that first day of different sectors speaking from their own perspectives. And then, again, this is for folks who haven't done the exercise. The second day is a half day, and you fairly quickly break up into subcommittees to address the top 5 priorities based on voting from the end of day 1. So we weren't together as a large group to process all of it together. We were split into smaller groups. So I think that when we get into our opiate task force meeting next week and we have our subsequent subcommittee meetings, that will give us a little bit more time and informal to some degree to talk about issues that came up during the SIM. So I don't know that we can even predict what all could come out of it, because I think everyone came out the door with their own set of priority topics. It'll be interesting to reconvene and find out what people's thoughts are in the weeks and month or two after the SIM. And again, when we get the report, I think that will be another opportunity for us to kind of get another look at what we're doing. So I see this as being a work in progress for a while.
And the good news was, this is Judy, the good news was we already had each area laid out, and we did have strategies in each one. Now, again, like we had to do earlier, kind of realign that. I think now we've got to just double check our alignment and where folks, the good news is we got extra input about this is a big goal and we need something now. So we've got a few of those to kind of put into the mix. And I was feeling we were really organized right before this, and that our strategies were looking really well. Now it does feel like we're a little off filter for a second. And yesterday we had to submit a grant for one of those areas. So literally we had to quickly do that because they gave a one-day extension because we were the last one in.
And the programming that we were seeking to fund wasn't on any of our maps. It was based out of the SIM that we did Tuesday and Wednesday. We drafted this grant application on Monday for additional programming. So if that gets funded, integrating that new programming into our map would be another opportunity for us to widen our ecosystem a bit and update our map.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that the ecosystem can constantly be evolving as your work continues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. If I had to pick one remark we needed to hear from you was that we're evolving. And after we kind of digest this, we may need some extra TA, like a TA call to go through integrating them with this and what does that mean. It may just fall in place, you know how things are, but for right now, we've just got to figure that out. And we look pretty well organized, and it's not a bad thing. Like you said, it's just, we heard clearly from our community priorities, which was good. So, and it's all about opiates and all about the treatment. And MAT, for example, stayed in there. So that's a good example of no change, really. It was one that had no change. So, right. But we've got some more to work on.
Basically, we didn't change our ecosystem because so much is pending that we didn't want to make changes and then later undo them. We wanted to wait until the dust had settled a little bit.
And I guess that would be a question back to you all of, is there any other county that's incorporated an opiate sequential intercept mapping process, and how that may fit? And we said that to the opiate SIM too, that they needed to be aware of the CCIM4C, and that these are multiple efforts coming out of the department simultaneously, and just being aware of all that.
Yeah, can you repeat your question to the rest of the community?
The question is that the collective impact grant that we're part of, great, and now we've got sequential intercept mapping, which is mapping with the criminal justice system and some of that around opiates, et cetera, of how do these tie together, or how do we complement? And I think we're pretty comfortable with that generally, but trying to figure out from a planning, like the documents and again, I do think we're gonna probably ask for a technical assistance call at the right moment when we kind of know where we're at with that. But if you have any other guidance relating CCIM4C to sequential intercept mapping for opiates.
So it sounds like the question is to the group. Have any of our other CCIM4C groups engaged in sequential intercept mapping?
Yes.
Just type in yes or no into the chat box.
I guess that's a no.
We've Ashtabula, no. Leanne from Claremont, mental health, but not SUD.
Thanks.
And I see other people are typing as well. Lawrence County, no. Marion, no. Clinton County has not. Clark County's not yet, but it's in the plan. It's part of Stepping Up Community. Muskingum, no.
So that might be a good connection to make, Clark and Wayne, if you're both integrating the SIM.
Thank you.
And I see Hamza is typing right now. Lorraine is currently in process. So you also have a peer in Lorraine. And I think that's really the beauty of collective impact. And I think it's to remember that it's all about the process. And I would just encourage all of you as you move forward to keep iterating and reiterating until you get somewhere where you feel you can get everything down on paper. And you'll have to do that. And you'll be forced to put wherever you're at and turn them in by the end of this funding opportunity, because we'll have to turn all this work into SAMHSA. So at some point, you're going to have to sort of cut off the new information flow, say, hey, here's where we are today, and then sit down and move forward. And knowing that this project ends April 30th, so you'll have to keep that in mind. So sort of all this new information now is coming in at perfect time for Judy and Joanna, because they'll be able to integrate it. But others, if you end up farther down the road, know that, you know, whatever you turn in is okay, but it shouldn't be your forever plan, because the idea of collective impact is that these aren't forever plans. So I think it's at some point you may need to push your coalitions or your groups or your subcommittees, hey, we just need to get this down and we need to get this on paper, but only you as PDs know when that push point is, right? And it could be maybe you're pushing for 3 subcommittees but not 2, and that's just part of the leadership. And we are all here to help you know when to make that call and to think that through and be your sounding board as you decide.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'll let April wrap up here, and then we'll continue moving forward.
Yes, thanks, Holly, and thanks for coming in there. And thanks to everyone who shared. I encourage you all to keep thinking about how your ecosystems can be helpful in thinking about strategy selection or implementation, and how you can use your subcommittees or the different areas from the different plans to address those topics. So I'll transition back to you, Holly, to take us into our next sharing.
Good, thank you. So we handed out the CCIM4C strategy description forms at our last meeting. We didn't have an opportunity to discuss them, but we want to make sure that you recall that you did receive them at that point. You also received a copy of the strategy description form with your pre-webinar materials, and you were instructed to review them before our learning community today. Just a friendly reminder that it is available on the CCIM4C website, and we did provide you a link to that today. So again, we started with this macro plan, or this idea of how communities could come together using a collective impact approach to reduce opioid use disorder deaths and increase access to treatment. This provides the highest level of view of what our CCIM4C communities are doing. So it's that quick at a glance, maybe good for someone like a mayor, or maybe good for someone like one of your state representatives or state senators who are in your area, to say, hey, this is what we are doing. And then other people will need more information. And we discussed that a lot of you right now are focused on how can I maximize the use of my CCIM4C ecosystem to choose strategies. Again, these problems are of opioid use disorder, and then choosing a BHAG, it's the double wicked problem scenario. You are going to need to rely on your ecosystem to support you as you select strategies. Again, this is a little bit more detailed, but it's still a medium level view. It is not enough detail if you were to give the strategic plan map to a prevention provider or a treatment provider or somebody in recovery supports to know exactly what is being implemented. This is a good document for people who need a little bit more detail, but not for those who will be funding you or like Ohio Moss, or people who will be implementing the actual work in the community. We need to dig one level deeper. So to do that, we have provided you with these strategy description forms. At this point, it serves as a double check. We've seen a lot of ideas about strategies, but this is to ensure that your strategies are grounded in evidence. What type of evidence? How do you know that that strategy is going to work? Who is actually going to implement it? This really is a roadmap to make sure that you're choosing the right strategy at the right time that's culturally relevant and sustainable for your community. Every CCIM4C community must submit one form per strategy. So for example, if you are doing your demand reduction plan and you're going to use PACs, you might use Too Good for Drugs, you might use youth-led prevention. That's 3 strategies. So underneath your demand reduction, the strategy description form that undergirds them are 1 per strategy. So everyone will have at least 1 strategy description form per strategic plan map because you have to pick 1 strategy. And then you may have more than 1, right? And that's okay. It sort of depends on where your subcommittees are going. This strategy description forms is essential because what it does is it provides a time and space for you as project directors to kind of hold your subcommittees, however you want to call them, or your subgroups, accountable for the strategies they are selecting. So they will need to complete this form, or you'll need to decide how you want to do that. And our conversation that Tracy's going to lead will help you think through how you are going to use the strategy description form. So I'm going to turn over the conversation to Tracy Johnson. Hopefully his sound is working. We weren't able to have him at the beginning. Tracy, could you unmute?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Holly. I appreciate it, and thank you, everyone. Now, as it relates to the strategy description form, we want to really talk about some. I want to talk to you about UPDs in a discussion about how you envision using this strategy description form. Now, understand that, as Holly mentioned, you will have one for at least each strategy. I want you to think about, by unmuting your phone, because it's a little bit more quicker, how will you introduce this form to your CCIM4C subcommittees, if that, by fact, is your structure, and then how can this form support your community's strategy selection process? I want you all, like I said before, to be cognizant of the time. So if you don't mind unmuting your phone, since typing may take a little longer, and this is a discussion rather than a short answer kind of process. Does anyone want to give some thoughts on how they see them using this form?
So this is Bridget from Ashtabula.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi. Our plan is to introduce the form in sections.
Okay.
We realize that it could be pretty overwhelming for the committee as a whole just to see it in one lump.
Okay.
So maybe present it to the different committees in sections and have it partially completed with at least the data-driven points, and let them move it forward.
Okay, good move. I like the idea of letting them move forward. And you might want to think about identifying someone from your group who you really feel confident, who stepped up as a leader or somewhat of a co-leader, who you might want to introduce the form to them early before that meeting to the larger group. And that person can be somewhat of the lead in helping to introduce that form, make it more comfortable for everybody to buy into it, instead of you just saying, here's a form, we want you to do it. And that might be a great idea you might want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? I'll let it simmer. We just want to hear your thoughts on how you might want to introduce it to folks. Or just tell us how you think this might support your community strategy selection process as well. Does it seem like it's difficult to understand for anyone? I mean, feel free to open up and let's talk. This is our time to help you, help your.
Hi, Tracy. This is Susan from Lawrence County. Yes, I'm kind of frustrated. I've looked over it a lot this week and tried to fill in some of the things, but again, I think there are some vocabulary challenges and some process challenges. So, you know, I guess it's going to take a technical assistance call.
Okay. Just kind of walk me through some of your technical challenges and then your vocabulary challenges. I want to hear that so everyone else can hear it, so we can all, you know, get a sense of maybe others are feeling that and didn't want to say it, or might want to join you in agreeing that might be some areas of concern.
Well, just for example, conceptual fit. You know, I had to go out on the internet and read about a conceptual fit and how that's compared to theoretical fit. I emailed my son, who's an attorney, and said, "Can you give me an example of a conceptual fit?" Just little things like that.
Okay.
That we're not used to working with every day. And I'll tell you, our coalition would be very challenged by all this too, and overwhelmed to be having to do this collectively. If we could even get them together, you know, we've got to find a way to get the group together, give them some food, and try to get them here and try to simplify the process. But we've got to understand it first.
Sure. Susan, we'll send out, there's actually, SAMHSA has guidance for what all of these conceptual fit, practical fit, and cultural fit mean. And so we'll make sure that we get that sent out. So thank you.
Yeah.
This is Carrie McKee again from Clark County. And yesterday I met with some law enforcement for a strategy that they want to work on. And I just had a chart, how, when, what, where, why. I had trouble getting them to sit through any part of that. They gave me a few for like how they want to do it, where they want to do it. And then they said, you figure out the rest. So that's going to take like, you know, forming. And I knew this to start with, that there's going to be more members of this group that will come together to work on this project. It's a best practice that we're going to try in our community. But I can see there's going to be a lot of challenges getting people at the table to do something like this when I've just tried to go through basics with them, and I didn't get very far. They didn't have the time. You know, that was their main thing, is that time is an issue. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Sure.
But I'm not giving up. There's a bigger group to work with. They're the stakeholders in it, but they weren't too interested in doing the planning.
Well, understanding
the strategy or the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, and then we know a lot of times when you have different individuals, there's some folks who really understand the importance of the planning process. So sometimes before you have the meeting with anyone as it relates to doing this process, you might have to sort of prep them on and see who's more interested in doing the planning process. Because sometimes you may not get everyone who's interested in doing this. There are folks who like doing it, to understand the meaning of doing the planning process, and it has validity to ultimately impacting your coalition to be successful. And so sometimes as you prepare your committee meetings, you may have to do some upfront conversational discussions with key folks and say, hey, one of the things we want to do at this next upcoming meeting is, you know, really look at putting things on paper to know the direction we want to go with this plan. And then you'll get a feel for who's interested and who's not. You know, can I count on you? Say, can I count on you to be there? Or which one of the other committee members you feel that may be useful in getting this done? It may not take the whole group. It may take a subgroup of that group who can then bring it to the group for final approval. Am I making sense?
Yes, this was a subgroup, and I was counting on them, but obviously I'm going to have to go in a different direction, you know, because they weren't interested in that.
Okay. Good point. I think I'd love to sort of have more conversation with you and supporting you in getting this process through. I think we can provide you some guidance if we can and really help you think the process through. Okay?
I just see it as kind of a stumbling block, not a roadblock. I just realized that I needed, because they're the major stakeholder in the project, but they don't want to be real involved in the planning of it. And you know, so I just need to go a different direction. But that's okay, that'll work.
And maybe you might have to interpret it a little different so you can put it on the paper. Maybe you say, you know, maybe you have to figure out how you can internally interpret it so a few of them, that group, that subgroup gets it, and then you can bring it back and put it on the document so it makes sense.
Right, exactly.
Tracy, this is Valerie. Could I step in a minute?
Yes, ma'am.
I had some thoughts about this, listening to the conversation and thinking about experiences that we've had previously with plans and identifying strategies. This is typically where we see the breakdown of plans. So I'm wondering, how as coalition directors or project directors, do you ensure that the strategies these other groups are selecting are grounded in the evidence and that are going to be effective and are culturally competent? Because without that, that's just usually the breakdown of all of this. So I'm curious as how do you ensure that all of these things that are in the document are met? Because I think that's what we definitely need to be doing as, you know, providers and trying to implement and plan. We have to pick the best strategy for our targets that, you know, we know is going to have an impact.
Leanne Watson says yes, exclamation point.
Thank you, Leanne. Because I think about that because I know it's tough and we're always on the go and people just want to do things because they want to do something. But we really have to be mindful, I think, of the process involved in that, or we just keep spinning our wheels and we don't see the change we want to see.
Right. I'm interested to hear from anyone who is on the line who have really gotten their committee or any one of their subcommittees to really buy into just even doing any type of written process planning to be helpful for their overall structure. Is there anyone from the different groups that have done that and been successful at it who want to share real quickly? I do want you all to understand that we want to help you all think this process through and provide you with support so you can get it across to your team, to your committee members. Because ultimately, if we're going to be successful and know how successful we are going to be and build capacity in our process, that we have to engage in some sort of written process that shows that, yes, we in fact are following a map. Should something happen to any of us, someone else can carry this process on and move it forward. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other want to share about how they might want to get their community or their committees involved in this process, or are you seeing other potential barriers or stumbling blocks? Okay, well, I would like to, at this point, then transition this segment of the webinar over to Dana and Ruben who will then link the idea of an ecosystem to your BHAG.
Great, thanks. Great, thanks, Tracy. And just as Tracy said, and kind of recapping a little bit of what everybody's talked about today, by the way, this is Ruben, sorry. We just wanted to reconnect some of what we've been talking about the ecosystem and apply it to what we're going to be asking you all to do with your BHAG. Very important to kind of apply the same kind of thinking there, you know, making sure that we've got this larger ecosystem to support the response we're taking to this kind of wicked problem within a wicked problem that the BHAG has ended up becoming for the way it kind of manifests for folks in your community. And just, you know, as with the opioid crisis, we've defined your BHAG as a wicked problem, as you have defined kind of the focus, the goal, and some of the plan areas for your BHAG goal. And even as you've begun to approach partners, it's important to consider whether you have a structure in place to support the work and align partners and actions across the ecosystem. Bringing new, diverse, multi-sector partnerships to the table without a structure and process for aligning efforts can be detrimental. So we want to consider how a structure can really support the work to achieve your BHAG and to address the wicked problem that you all are identifying as one of the core drivers for the epidemic in your community. And so we are going to be briefly reflecting on some of these ideas and some of these questions on today's webinar. We've got about 15 minutes maybe that we're going to take to discuss some of this. And we really want to make sure that it's a robust conversation. So we're going to ask people to unmute their phones and respond to some of these questions in a minute, so that we can really get into identifying some of the things that we're learning, some of the challenges that we're facing. And then, you know, we're kind of seeing this as planting a seed for bigger discussions that we're going to have for our face-to-face meeting in January as we look at the BHAG ecosystem a little bit more closely. So I'm going to pass it to Dana to kind of engage us in a conversation over some of these questions.
Thank you, Ruben. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dana. Do want to encourage you again, as Ruben said, and as we've done in our prior agenda items, to just unmute your phone and jump in. We really want to, we've heard a lot today, I think, about the value of the ecosystem and really being strategic as we think about our strategic plan maps and areas in developing our ecosystem and the subcommittees to support those ecosystems. And we've done a lot of that. It sounds like you guys are progressing really nicely in terms of your larger opiate plan and the various components of that plan, utilizing your ecosystem and your subcommittees and partners. And we want to make sure that we do the same for your big, hairy, audacious goal plan area. And so we have kind of the series of questions to help facilitate our dialogue around this. And I just want to encourage you all to jump in where you think you have something to share and to unmute your phones to do that. So I'm going to actually kind of combine the first two questions to get us really thinking about how your current ecosystem, I think some of you have already started looking at modifications to that and adding to that and submitted that prior to the webinar. And some of you may not have, but you may be thinking about ways that you are going to modify that ecosystem for the larger plan. But I'm wondering how you feel your current ecosystem supports your BHAG, and then kind of leading into question two, do you see that you may need to adjust it or modify it in any way to support your big, hairy, audacious goal plan area? So I'd love to hear from some of you guys on that. And if you would just kind of start by sharing your name and county again, that'd be great. So has anyone been thinking about their ecosystem and their BHAG or how it connects to their BHAG at all?
Dana, this is Carrie, and I've already talked about it. I don't know if you want me to elaborate again, but I'm talking about taking two other coalitions, suicide prevention and also the trauma coalition, and bringing kind of leaders from those coalitions together to get at what our underlying problem is, whether it's poverty, violence, trauma, connectiveness. But that's what I'm looking at with ours, with our VHAG, because they are all kind of, we're a part of each other. And that's where I want to get those people at the table to kind of go through this process.
Thank you, Carrie. I did hear that. And thanks for jumping in to share that again, because I think that brings forth a couple really critical points. And one is that, and what we've kind of reinforced all along about your Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal plans, is that they may not just sit at the collective table that you are leading and guiding as a backbone organization, that there are other existing coalitions and groups within your community that are going to be really important for you to connect that to. And they may be the tables where this work gets done, where the strategies get developed and decided on. And then I think what's really important about that is that you think about the systems and ways that you're connecting it to your larger initiative and making sure communication flows, continuous communication flows between the two groups, two or more groups, as in Carrie's case. And I love that you're kind of developing a small, I would call it a work group of leaders from all the three different groups to begin work on your Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal area. I think that's great, Carrie, and I know that's something we've talked about in the past. I'm so happy to hear, you progressing and hear how you have less frustration about the work. So great to hear you today on the call.
And this is Wayne County also.
Hi. Hi, Wayne. Is this Joanna or Judy?
This is Judy, and Joanna
Judy.
here. And also, ours is similar, so I jumped in right there. We have the trauma and our trauma resiliency network, which, for example, meets tomorrow. And we have some common members between the opiate task force and the trauma resiliency. We haven't done it like a specific subgroup, but we could, like the other group. That was a nice idea. We both kind of lit up and went, oh, that helped to hear somebody else doing that, because we have that workforce, that other, coalition that's kind of got its own energy, and we started some things with them, and it took hold specifically with our board because we did our annual dinner around trauma, et cetera, to kind of get some grounding with that. And last year we did it on the opiate task force, actually medication-assisted treatment with Dr. Labor. So that kind of helped me. It gave me energy when I heard their presentation, because it's like, oh yeah, we're working on that too, in different ways, but similarity.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the ways you're going to be working to develop your ecosystem to support your BHAG. And I would really encourage you, that's the whole point of our learning community and our work together. I would encourage you and Carrie to potentially consider a call together to think more about how you're developing your ecosystem around your BHAG. It sounds like there are a lot of intersections. So thank you for sharing that. Are there others? I think, one interesting thing is I know some folks are just kind of getting started on developing your BHAG or are still finalizing their goal or components or strategic plan maps to their BHAG. But I think over the past few weeks since our last face-to-face, a lot of folks have made a lot of progress on that, but maybe you haven't gotten to kind of looking at their ecosystem. And one of the things I'm wondering is for those folks, you know, where do you see yourselves, or what are some of the new partners that folks maybe have identified that weren't originally a part of their ecosystem that they now feel like they need to recruit and potentially bring to the table, or new subcommittees that you may be thinking about needing to get started to support your ecosystem? Are there learning community partners who are thinking that's a part of what needs to happen next? And if so, could you share some of your thoughts on that? Any folks thinking about adding to, modifying their ecosystem to support their BHAG?
Oh, Dana, this is Susan in Lawrence County.
Hi, Susan.
We kind of like our ecosystem for our BHAG, but we're talking now about, you know, doing a ecosystem graphic for the whole project.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where it shows all of our different plans. I'm just real happy to announce that we had a good conversation regarding social or community connectedness 2 weeks ago, just in our general coalition group, and I'm hoping that that's going to help get this thing kicked off a little bit more, where we can get the community interested. We feel like we're doing this in a planning way, and that the rest of the community is reacting to everything with what they have to do, their treatment, their law enforcement, the health department, making sure that people have naloxone, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's still a struggle that everybody's working in their own little silos, and Molly and I are working hard to do planning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to hear what everybody's doing and these successes. It just makes it a little bit more frustrating.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
We was thinking about possibly doing a summit and bringing all these folks together, maybe for an extended period of time throughout the day. Is there any way that we could possibly edit our budget to provide some food for that? Because if you see people, they will come.
I'm gonna defer.
That would be a question. Yeah, that would be a question for Ohio Moss, and so I think you could just drop them an email.
Okay, sure will. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and what I would say about that is, I think it's a great idea to bring everyone together to kind of build awareness of what's all going on collectively, to try to really bridge the silos that you talk about that are often common in our work, and I'm sure other project directors on this call experience. I think a part of your role as backbone agencies in a collective impact process is to ensure that communication and to really build that collective table. And sometimes it's happening behind the scenes through individual conversations to really engage partners, to get them to the table. And then sometimes it's this thing you're talking about where you get everybody in the same room and really try to build support and momentum around the larger goals that you're working on. And so I think it's a great idea, and encourage you, as Holly just did, to reach out to Ohio Moss to let them know kind of what you see as a need in terms of getting everybody there. And, feeding people always is one of those things. And if it's not your Ohio Moss budget, I know in conversations with Susan, I've heard you just talk about, being able to get support from your corporate partners, things like that, and maybe that's an option. So I, do encourage you, if you've heard things from your other project partners, ways that they're really being able to engage their ecosystem and break down those silos, I encourage you to reach out to folks. If we can do a TA call or, with us and Tracy or whoever you think is appropriate to kind of help you think about how to build momentum, break down the silos, really engage your coalition effectively, we're happy to do that with you as well.
That sounds good, because that's going to take away time from this group and the agenda today, but I just want to let you know where we are, and Molly does too.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and it's always good to know, because, and that's going to lead me this is a quick discussion, that's going to lead me to our last kind of question. I'm going to skip over question number 4, but I really encourage you all to look at that question, and that's one of the things I think you need to consider as you're developing your ecosystem for your BHAG, and looking at its linkages, because we don't think the BHAG is necessarily, even though it's a separate wicked problem, it is not exclusive of your opiate plan and the elements of the other 5 plan areas. We often hear you talking about the linkages to it. We often hear you talk about things that are going to show up in the BHAG plan and other plans. So it is a part of this larger planning process, but it's not separate. And so you really need to be thinking about, how you're going to ensure communication and awareness across your plan areas. But one of the things I want to just end our conversation with is just hearing from you guys any other. I appreciate Susan and Molly sharing kind of their challenges, and I just want to open up to hear if any other communities have big challenges or challenges that they would like to share with the group around developing their BHAG ecosystem. And maybe it'd be great to hear from some of those who haven't, finalized their BHAG goal areas, if you perceive any challenges to your BHAG ecosystem. Any other folks thinking through challenges or anticipating challenges to developing their ecosystem for their BHAG, or recruiting a new partner or engaging a new coalition or initiative in that BHAG? So by hearing no other comments or questions, this is just, as Ruben started out saying, a start to this discussion. We know it's really quick, and we'll be following up with you in between now and our next face-to-face to further this discussion, to really think about how we build out our ecosystems to support the BHAG, or to look at where we might need to modify those in support of that. I thank you, those of you who engaged in our discussion today around this, and hope that it's been useful to those of us who are listening. And I am now going to turn this over to David and Holly to keep us moving forward in our agenda. Thank you. I'm sorry, and maybe that was David and April, I think?
This is David. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can, David. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to briefly have us look at this slide, which you've seen before. And the slide, the portion in green at the top of the slide shows 6 stages in the process of change. And outlined in the purple below is the emotions that either you as project directors or your coalition may go through as you go through this change process. And the author of the book, Creating Tomorrow, who developed this model, notes that this really happens in every model of change and every type of change, whether it's personal, organizational, or system. So since we don't have a lot of time, what I would like us to do is to just think about the 6 stages: mobilize, here you're at the beginning of the change process and motivated, but not knowing the depth of the change. Discover is the detail of the current state is being uncovered, and challenges may emerge bigger than they first appeared. And then deepen, you're getting more at the root causes. And develop is you start developing solutions and arrive at a shared view of what changes are needed. And then deliver, those involved are starting to implement solutions that can start to make a positive difference. And then sustain would be the last stage leading toward positive and lasting change. What I'd like to do is not have you type into the chat box, but I'd like to just have people open up their mics, and I wanted to just take maybe three people's takes on where you think your coalition is in the six stages of change, and just talk briefly. Would anyone be able to say where they think their coalition is in these stages, in one of these stages?
This is Wayne County, Joanna, to specify.
Hi, Joanna.
Hi. So looking at this, which is really helpful, I would say it's difficult to pinpoint where we are, because as new opportunities such as our sequential intercept mapping experience, or different grant funding that has its own set of stipulations and guidelines, as these new things are being introduced into our coalition, I think we're kind of fluid, where we'll make some progress on a certain task and then something will happen and we might have to change our plan or make some adjustments. And so we might find ourselves moving back and forth on the scale because of that.
Okay. I appreciate that, Joanna. That is good. A good point, that you could move back and forth, or different parts could be in different stages.
And a good example of that, this is Judy, but a good example of that is
Hi, Judy.
recovery housing, and we were setting goals around that, and we've done very well. So we get another recovery house and another recovery house. And so then we thought we were done, and one of our applications came through last week for young people, transitional age recovery housing. So we're finalizing that with the department. So that kind of took us backwards a little bit, but it's a good success. I mean, it's almost like I would have told you a week ago we were at the end of that goal, and then we had applied for this other grant back in January, February. So now we have another opportunity, and it shifts us a little bit. So it's good. It just, like you said, I would have told you I was at Deliver. Now I'm back a couple of steps because we're deepening it, going to another population at another site in a different way. And we've not done anything previously with transitional age youth. So and we're going to have to add a member or two to that group to help us with that, and like you said, broaden the evidence base. So we were in a good spot, but now we'll be a little bit different. But the moving target is our... Okay.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to actually move along in the interest of time. Please realize that where your coalition is in any of these stages is where they should be, and be aware that there may be these reactions of change in emotions, but that is part of this natural process. So I'm going to turn it over to Holly for the next discussion point.
Sure. So we know where we've all probably been on this change cycle, because initiating collective impact or talking about the Thrive or the ACER or any of the new ideas, even if it comes down to just the strategy description form, is a change in your community. So you can iterate through these stages that are on this slide for new tools, for new ideas, and it's really common. And hopefully what this does is it normalizes the process for you. As many of you know, we have a collective impact or CCIM4C summit coming up, and why it's really related to this idea of managing a new initiative change is we are curious. Would everyone write in the chat box one topic you think that is absolutely essential for those who are new to collective impact to hear at this one-day summit? So please just type in one topic that you think is absolutely essential for communities to hear about at this summit. Okay, Carrie says the strategic mapping process. Thank you, Carrie. We'll make that note. I see a lot of people are typing. We really appreciate your feedback. Tony and Patty, coalition member recruitment and keeping members involved. Thank you. Joanna and Judy, strategic mapping process. Leanne, importance of working together to develop plan and strategies. Ecosystem information was helpful. Ashley says data collection. Thank you. This is so helpful for us. Just whatever first comes to your mind, that's what we need because it's going to be at the top of your mind. Tommy, developing the ask to get other organizations involved. Leanne agrees. That's a good one, Tommy. Hamza says keeping committees guided and focused, so more procedural. Bridget, what the process is and how they fit in the process and how to engage partners who do not see the opioid crisis issue as their issue. So that engagement strategy. Thank you. Molly and Susan, sustainability. And for those of you who are still thinking, we'll move on to the next two questions. So what types of sessions, if you can think of any that are opioid specific and BHAG specific. So if you could just type the word opioid and then a dash and let us know, or BHAG and then a dash and let us know, that will give us some quick information. So Tommy added, helping everyone understand the importance of planning and readiness to avoid skipping straight to strategies. Yes. That's that magic wand that we all need. So if you could continue, if everyone could just type in, if you think there's something that's opioid specific. So for example, you really would like to see an MAT focused strategy or something like that. And just type in the word opioid. Or if you have an idea for BHAG. Okay, Leanne says she'd like to see some information on trauma and its impact on families related to the BHAG. Bridget says the BHAG, the process to define root causes. Molly and Susan, just another overarching assistance in with helping community members, so that translational piece. Tony and Patty for opioid, MAT, and for BHAG recovery housing. Good. And Carrie, opioid, developing alternative medicine, exercise, and physical therapy strategies. So looking at some of those strategies. A last call for opioid specific or BHAG specific. The last question isn't something that we want to address today, but it's something we will spend some time really digging into at our face-to-face. And that's, we want you all to think of a way we could showcase the work of this cohort 1 group at the summit. So if you could take some time, as you're processing your work and reflecting on it, to help us think of a way that would best support you in sharing your work and your efforts with the wider community that's interested in collective impact. We would really appreciate it. And we'll send you some reminders along the way. But this is just something we want to be sure that that we do showcase the hard work that you all have been doing in your communities. So if you think of an idea between now and the face-to-face, just drop any one of us a line. There's no wrong door, but it's just something that we wanted to introduce so you all can be thinking about. Thank you very much for your feedback. And then April's just going to close us down here.
Thanks, Holly. So quickly, since we're running out of time, these last few slides, please take a moment after the webinar to review them carefully on your own. We have the learning community schedule. Note that this was scheduled before the OACB-HA Legislative Day. So please keep that in mind and make sure someone from your community is able to attend our events. This is a great opportunity to engage in shared governance. Remember, if you have technical assistance, this slide can tell you how to make a request. So particularly those in Wayne County who asked for TA earlier in the webinar, take a look at this slide, but it's for everyone as well. Here's our optional webinar series schedule for the future. This can be found on the website. We have an additional learning opportunity as well. Links to that are here. We also wanted to bring your attention to a federal funding opportunity for rural communities, so please look that over on the slide deck when you have a chance. And the HPIO Addiction Policy and Inventory Scorecard. Please take a look at this slide. It lists Ohio's harm reduction deserts, which are 17 rural Ohio counties. And this link can give you some more information about that. And then for your concrete next steps, remember that for opioid use disorder, you need a strategy selection document that Holly talked about. You need to finalize your strategic plan, finalize your ecosystem document, and basically just finalize all your documents. And then for your BHAG, develop a theory of change in an ecosystem. So with that, I'll leave parting thoughts up to our hosts, and we're right at 1 o'clock.
So I will just say thank you to everyone for today, and be looking for over the next probably week or two, we will send the email directly to each of your project directors regarding the implementation application. And feel free to reach out to Molly or myself with any questions or needs that you may have. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much. And this concludes our virtual learning opportunity. Have a good day, everyone, and we will see you in January.